In a relatively safe and prosperous time, in a society that lacks many built-in challenges and hardships, travel has become the way to have an adventure, to demonstrate a kind of bravery, a cosmopolitan courage where one ventures into unfamiliar territory and undergoes a rite of passage to become an enlightened global citizen. Travel is thus seen as both a tool of personal development and an almost altruistic moral good. In short, as the old religious sources of guidance and identity have fallen away, a kind of cult of travel has developed in their place. Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by you, the fans and the listeners of the show. If you would like to support the show, go to www.patreon.com/theworldwanderers. And for just a small amount, you can support the show, and a little goes a long way. Thanks in advance for your support.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're really excited for this episode, first of all, because we haven't done just the two of us talking in quite a number of episodes now. We've had really amazing guests on, which is also awesome. But the podcast started as just Ryan and I talking. So it's exciting when we just get to sit down behind the microphones and sort of just talk about travel, which is exactly what we're doing today. And there's a really popular article that we discovered called Against the Cult of Travel, or What Everyone Gets Wrong About the Hobbit. And we found it on the Art of Manliness blog, and it's written by Brett and Kate McKay, and it's super popular. It's been shared a ton. It's a really interesting read, so we'll definitely put a link for that on the show notes. But we're kind of going to go through and just share our opinions about different portions of the article, different portions of the blog post.
Yeah, and so you heard an excerpt from it right at the start of this episode, and we're going to go through, talk about a few key points that are made within the article. Some of them we agree with, some of them we disagree with, and a few we kind of just would add a bit more nuance to.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, the article is called Against the Cult of Travel. So a good place to start is sort of talking about what is the cult of travel? What exactly does that mean? It's sort of this idea of travel being popularized through social media, through videos, Instagram, photos, memes, things like that. And it's kind of become this thing that's so popularized in our culture. And at the very beginning of the article, it says, don't know what you want to do after graduating college? Take a year off travel. Spark on out of your relationship? Take more trips with your significant other, and other such things like that. And that is kind of the cult of travel. It's like this idea that's come into our society, especially sort of in the millennial age, where it's like, oh, you don't know what you want to do after you graduate high school? Why don't you go take a trip? You don't know what you want to do after college? Go take a trip. That's exactly what we did. And it's kind of just become this, I guess, quote unquote, like cult of travel.
Yeah, just like a really popular cultural meme that if you are to be in like in group, you should do this thing. And if you haven't done this thing, there's maybe something wrong with you. Is, I think, the view that people from outside would have.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of like, it's interesting being, I guess, from the inside of this cult of travel and sort of almost feeling like a defensiveness about it and being like, well, yeah, if you don't know what you want to do out of high school, like I think travel is the best way to do that. But sort of to take like my personal experiences and my personal opinion out of that, sort of the idea of cult of travel is this thing that like everybody's doing. It's cool to do it. It's a really like fun thing to do. Like go do it type thing.
Yeah. And it is funny because I've kind of changed quite a bit about like the social circles I've interacted with over the past kind of year and a half. And it's interesting going from one here in Canmore where a lot of people have pursued traveling as something they want to do in their 20s to a different circle that's more entrepreneurial focused. And in that group, it seems like there's kind of a much stronger counter meme to travel where there's people who are like, oh yeah, I'd love to take a career break and go traveling at some point. But then there's people who feel very strongly about people who travel as like these people are kind of, I don't know, like wasting their time. They should be working. There's something like inferior about them because they want to do this. I don't know if that's a fair characterization.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because we experience totally different reactions from our friends, our family, peers at work, social circles, the first time we decided to go traveling versus the second time. It was like kind of socially approved. It's like, okay, you finished university. It's this like natural break in life to take this like time to have this experience. Whereas once you've got this job, it's this idea of you're going to quit and do what? What are you planning to do with your life? Like there's sort of this confusion from people who don't feel the draw to do that.
Yeah. And so on one level, it is culturally accepted. It's like culturally accepted in kind of the millennial social media culture. There's very much like a cult of travel there. But then still for most people, like interacting with the daily lives, it's not exactly an accepted thing to do to go to your family and friends and say like, hey, I'm quitting my job in your mid-20s to go spend a year traveling. I just want to focus on like having fun and reading and like I have the savings to do that. So it's kind of funny how it's accepted in one area, but still very not appropriate to a lot of other groups. But so when you go on to Instagram or Facebook, I think this is the place where you see like more of a cult of travel, and it's like memes, your friends who are traveling places with their quotes, like travel is X, travel is Y. You won't know your own culture until you travel to another culture, that kind of stuff. And one of the big quotes that you see on travel memes is not all who wander are lost, which is a J.R.R. Tolkien quote.
Yeah.
And so what this article goes into in kind of the midsection is about how the Hobbit is kind of this tale of a city dwelling, somewhat boring character who goes off on this massive adventure, exploring things,
fighting giants.
And it's kind of this metaphor that some people draw to traveling, that, oh, Bilbo Baggins is kind of like the person working in his cubicle who goes out and has a massive adventure. And the point that they make in the article is that J.R.R. Tolkien didn't really see adventuring as something you do location-wise. It's more something you do in your imagination. So there's a good quote from J.R.R. Tolkien in here where he says, I like gardens, trees, and unmechanized farmlands. I smoke a pipe and like good plain food, unrefrigerated, but detest French cooking. I like and even dare to wear in these dull days ornamental waistcoats. I am fond of mushrooms out of a field. Have very simple sense of humor, which my appreciative critics find tiresome. I go to bed late and get up late. When possible, I do not travel much.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the most like striking quotes for me in this article because, you know, the article talks about this cult of travel and how it's sort of changing and evolving in our society. And then it goes to talk about how The Hobbit is really this novel that is about travel. It's about this plain and simple person or hobbit who lives this very sort of boring life. And then this massive adventure comes to him and he's very like, no, I don't really need this. And then he goes on it and it's very life-changing for him. And so then it kind of feels like the article is shifting towards like, okay, this is what life's about. Life is about finding these adventures, having these adventures placed in front of us at our doorstep and taking them. And then it goes in to say how J.R.R. Tolkien himself was actually not a traveler. He was not somebody who went out and adventured and drew his ideas from his own personal adventures. He was just very imaginative and sort of like getting lost in his own head, in his own world, which is also pretty interesting. So there's some kind of interesting points in this where the authors go in to talk about how you don't necessarily need to go far to have adventure.
Yeah, and that there's more of like an inner journey of like introspection and imagination that you could do without actually physically traveling somewhere. And so the point they make in the article, or how they try to tie Tolkien writing these stories of adventures with Tolkien's somewhat unadventurous life. Here's another excerpt. In other words, books like The Hobbit are not necessarily supposed to inspire trips to far-flung lands, but rather to restore the freshness of familiar surroundings right in front of our faces. Once you discover this doorway to realms beyond, you're able to see the world through a mythological lens and find that there are hidden dimensions even within the walls of one's own hobbit hole. Once you've been there and back again, your perspective is forever changed. You begin to see things as they really are. Everything from the view outside your apartment to your commute to work can become more meaningful, even magical. And then to skip ahead a tiny bit, what Tolkien understood is that when it comes to life's most important journeys, quests of spirituality, self-discovery, and self-mastery, location is irrelevant. The greatest adventures don't require a passport. In fact, our outer journeys can inhibit our inner ones.
The thing that I find most interesting about specifically the first excerpt that you read is that when I first read this, I was like, yes, this is exactly how I felt after I traveled. And I mean, I love reading, you do as well. And I think that there is something to say for getting lost in somebody else's world in a really well-written book. But it's so rare that I get so lost in a book that I actually come out of a time of reading and I'm like, oh my God, like that mountain is so beautiful. Like, you know, J.R.R. Tolkien can do it and like J.K. Rowling can do it, but like what other authors can really...
So what do you mean? When you say like you come out and think that mountain is beautiful, you mean like when you stop reading your book and then you start appreciating the things around you more?
Yeah. So I think, so when I read that excerpt, I was like, yes, this is the exact experience I've had when I came back from traveling the first time. Is when we went on our first 6-month backpacking trip. That's the longest I'd ever been away from like Alberta, from the mountains, from where I grew up, because I went to university so close to where I grew up. And I went away for this extended period of time and came back and was like, wow, where I'm from is really spectacular. Like, it's pretty cool that I grew up right outside of the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Like, it's pretty cool that I live an hour away from them at that point and can go explore them and stuff. It was going far away from home gave me that appreciation. And I've never really had that just from getting lost in an adventure in a novel, personally, like outside of probably The Hobbit and then like Harry Potter. Have you ever found that reading books, or what's your opinion on that?
Oh, well, yeah, definitely books have encouraged me to appreciate more about the surroundings. There's one in particular I was reading not too long ago about an entrepreneur in Pakistan and just like the life struggles that person had to undergo. And I came out feeling like, wow, it's pretty awesome to be here, living where we're living.
Is that Getting Filthy Rich and
Rising in Asia? Yeah. But so I guess the point of this part is kind of that people read a story about someone going on this big adventure. And the point that Brett and Kate McKay are trying to make is that there are adventures available to you that aren't necessarily location based. Like, you don't have to go traveling to have an adventure. What else is that what you think the point of this section is? Yeah.
So I think that there's kind of like sort of two different things I drew on. So I was specifically talking about that first excerpt before, with like everything from the view outside your apartment to your commute to work can become more meaningful, even magical. And I think that coming into the second one, talking about how life's most important journeys, location can be irrelevant. I think that there's definitely something to say for that. I think that there's a lot of like beautiful moments that can happen in life where you're not traveling. I think that, you know, things like marriage or like having your first child, or, you know, even getting their like university degree after you've worked for like 4 years and walking across that stage. Like, those are all really beautiful things that can happen in life that you don't need to be traveling in order to appreciate. I think that something that's really interesting is that, like, yes, the greatest adventures don't require a passport, but I feel like in my experiences, a lot of the greatest adventures I've had in my life have required a passport. I don't I don't know. I guess it depends like where you live and how you embrace where you live. I've had a lot of amazing experiences living in Canmore, right outside of Banff National Park and climbing really magical mountains. But I've also had that around the world as well.
Yeah. And we're going to get like more into the meat of their argument against the cult of travel. But I think the point about this section is that a lot of what people get from traveling is kind of this like inner change. And that's what people crave and seek, where they go away and then they come back feeling like they can appreciate the place they live more, or they can see different ways they want to take their life. And that journey, that like internal journey, isn't necessarily something that requires travel. And as we go forward, I think you could see that they're making the point that travel doesn't have like anything special to offer to that internal journey. And where we would disagree is say that we've really felt through our experience that it's been kind of a fundamental point that's led us to be able to make changes on that internal pathway.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't necessarily like disagree with the point that they're making here, that you can have adventures right from your own home and that you can have like a really powerful inner journey without traveling. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I think as we get a little bit further on, like Ryan said, we'll be able to see a little bit more clearly kind of the heart of this article and get a bit deeper. And so there's a quote that goes like this. It says, "Certainly there is absolutely nothing wrong with travel when it's given its proper weight and is stripped of undue moral significance, exaggerated powers, and inflated expectations. The recalibration of those expectations begins with the acknowledgement that there is nothing inherently valuable about travel. The benefits associated with it, like the chance to expand one's perspective, grow in maturity, and learn how to handle uncertainty, are certainly real, but do not automatically accrue simply by moving from point A to point B. If they did, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, who began her globe-trotting adventure flaky and narcissistic, would have ended her trip a better person. And yet, spoiler alert, she seems no less self-absorbed by the journey's end. The value that can be derived from travel only comes to those who engage it with the right mindset and a pre-existing self-sufficiency, qualities that can be developed anywhere and must be formed before you start out. Many people hope that traveling will help them change or find themselves, but if you can't become the person you want to be right where you are, then you won't be able to do it when you're 5,000 miles distant."
So this is kind of the meat of the article, that the argument that there's nothing inherently valuable about travel, and that the people who do gain value of it already have some sort of pre-existing qualities that would have allowed them to gain that from home.
Yeah, I think that for me, this is probably the most like powerful section of the article. Like the point that I was like, okay, this is like where I feel the most while reading.
Yeah, and this is definitely like the strongest claim that they're making. So first question, is there anything inherently valuable about travel?
I think that there is. In my opinion, the things that are inherently valuable about travel are that you're forced outside of your comfort zone. You're forced to be in places where you don't necessarily speak the language, where you're not comfortable with the food. You don't have your family or friends to back you up or fall back on. You don't have all of those things that are so comfortable at home. You're really forced to every single day try new things and meet new people. And I think that that's inherently valuable. Would you agree? Or what's your opinion? Yeah,
so I think that it obviously what you get out of travel depends on what you bring to it. And that certain people who are more introspective are going to probably get more out of that experience because they're thinking about what's going on with them. And that if you go into it planning on just seeing some cool things, taking some photos, eating food, and then you come home and go back into your life exactly the same as it was before, you're probably going to get less value out of that experience. But it's a different type of value for you. That might be what you needed, just a break from your day-to-day life to re-energize, something cool to talk about with your friends.
I think, though, it's interesting to think about the people that I know in my life who haven't traveled long term the way that we have, but they've taken 2 or 3 week trips to places in Europe or Central or South America. And it's kind of opened their eyes to what else is out there. And I think that that's the biggest way that travel can change you, that it can't while you're just at home, because when you're at home or you're in the same country that you grew up in, you're surrounded by the same cultural values, the same types of people, the same societal beliefs. And when you go somewhere else, even if it's just like England or Australia, you see that people live a little bit differently. They see the world a little bit differently. And then it kind of opens your mind to this idea of like, oh, there's something else out there. There's people who live differently than me. And I think that that's something that you get regardless of whether or not you plan on getting that. Because you're totally right. You can go into it being like, like we did with South America. Like, we want to learn a language. We want to personally grow as people. Like, that's what we wanted out of that trip. Whereas the first time we traveled, we were, 21 and 22. We were still, drinking a ton. We partied a lot. But I think that I still grew immensely as a person in ways that I never intentionally planned to.
Yeah. And so I think right at the end of that last excerpt you read, many people hope that traveling will help them change or find themselves. But if you can't become the person you want to be right where you are, then you won't be able to do it when you're 5,000 miles distant. And I would completely disagree with that, because I think that what that ignores is really habits, routines, and how much your peer group and your social circle influences you as a person. And this is something that we found when we went away and started traveling. When you start meeting a ton of people, you start to learn all these things about yourself, how you're trying to be liked in the eyes of all these people you're meeting when they're just gonna go away, or how you define yourself in regards to the group of people you're around. So in your group of friends at home, you can be the funny one, or the serious one, or the smart one, but that identity is going to get shattered where you're constantly in a different group of people. And when you're traveling, you're forced to interact with a lot of people that you don't normally interact with. So it makes you very aware of the judgments you make about people, how flawed those judgments are. So you learn that lesson. And it just gives you all this opportunity, because you're changing your setting, because you're changing your social circle. The only thing that really is remaining constant is you. You're kind of able to perceive yourself better because of all this change that's happening.
Yeah.
And then not only that, but I think an important factor in it, at least for us, is just space. And this is something that's not inherent about travel, but if you, for example, were like, oh, I'm just going to take 6 months, I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to be at home and be introspective, I think you could get a lot of value out of that experience. But when you're running around at home, going to work, you have demands from friends, family, etc. You don't have the time to really think about what you want from life. You don't have the time to think about what you don't like about the life you're living right now. And travel is a great environment to have space to think about all those questions. And of course, that's not having that space to think about those questions isn't inherent in travel, but it's way more there than any other common life stage. Even somewhere like university, which kind of proposes to do the same things: come, find, change yourself, become a better person, doesn't really give you the environment to do that kind of introspection that traveling does. And this is something that we found amongst so many people who have spent longer than a month traveling. They come home and are like, hey, I want to do this differently. I really thought about this when I was traveling, or I learned that there's these things about myself that I'm doing at home that I don't want to keep doing. And some of them have better success when they come home, or they don't. But it seems like almost exclusive that people have those thoughts coming home. And then I think another thing that this discounts is just how troubling a lot of people's situations are at home, and how good of an escape it is for people. Like, if you have a very destructive family situation and you're in your 20s and you're dealing with your parents and they're a little bit crazy and your siblings a bit crazy, or you're in a bad relationship and you maybe just ended that relationship. Sure, if you were some sort of ideal character, like maybe a character in an Ayn Rand novel, you would just stay at home and solve those problems. But as a human, having space and getting away from a situation gives you a lot of power to come back into that situation and come back more energized, more clear-headed, and more able to handle the situation. So those are a couple points that I'd make about how you might not be able to find yourself or change yourself when you're at home, but how traveling really does make it a lot more accessible.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said 100%. And it was interesting having Rory Madigan, who's been on the podcast a couple times, in town with us last week, and just talking to him about how travel's really changed him, and feeling like as I talk to him, like him and I have experienced so many similar changes. Like when I worked in corporate and when he was back in Australia, it's like we both really liked like keeping up with fashion and like owning a lot of material goods in the form of clothing, and shopping was something that made me feel good, or surface level good. And it's kind of to the point now where it's like I don't really care as much about stuff like that, and I think that that's a really good thing to be separated from. Like, I don't know, if you want to make a career around fashion and that's what you're really passionate about, I'm definitely not trying to discredit that in any sort of way. But I think that it's important to look at that and get really clear on why you like shopping. And, you know, is it because your physical manifestation is something that's like your identity is really tied to, which I know mine was in the past. It doesn't really matter when you really start like digging a little bit deeper. Like these things just don't really matter, which is kind of a cool discovery because it's really freeing. It's really freeing not to be attached to the way you look or how other people think you look and that sort of thing.
But so is there something inherent about travel that leads people to that realization?
That's a good question. I don't know that it's necessarily inherent. I guess maybe like in backpacker life, it kind of is inherent depending on how long you backpack for. I mean, maybe a month you can bring enough stuff that you're not a dirty, grungy backpacker, but I think it was probably around like the 3 or 4 month mark. And I think especially getting to Southeast Asia for me, I was just like, it is so freaking hot here. I'm sweating constantly. I kind of smell all the time. And everyone else does as well. So it really doesn't matter. Nobody's like, oh, she didn't put on mascara today. Like, what's wrong with her? Like, oh, you've worn that shirt 3 days in a row. Like, you're disgusting. Like, it's just sort of a different acceptability in terms of what you look like.
Yeah. And since most people's travel experience when they're doing long-term travel is living out of a backpack, it puts you in a situation where you're forced to really be always aware of the amount of stuff you have. And
you're carrying it on your back.
You get a massive incentive to be less concerned about having a different piece of clothing for every single day. And since you're seeing a different group of people, you have less incentive to care about what those people think of you.
Yeah.
And
I remember when we first traveled, I would really like say we were going to Buckingham Palace one day, and then the next day we were going like up to Edinburgh and going to be taking photos at the castle. I would be really concerned, like, oh, I need to wear a different outfit because I'm going to take photos at both and people are going to see that I'm wearing the same thing. But it's like, you only have so much in your backpack. Like, it doesn't matter. I know when we were in South America, I would kind of wear the same clothes, like the same outfits back to back to back until they were so dirty that I couldn't wear them anymore, because that's what was easiest. To unpack a small amount of stuff is so much easier than to create different outfits every single day.
Yeah. And I think that the point I would make is that traveling is obviously going to be different depending on the situation, depending on where you're going, depending on who's going in. But in general, it's safe to say that it's an environment that's conducive to building self-esteem, because you're challenging yourself to be more self-reliant in an environment you've never been to before, especially if you're somewhere that speaks a different language. So it's conducive to improving your self-esteem, and it's conducive to introspection, because there's going to be long moments of silence, long moments where you're all by yourself, especially if you're traveling solo. But even if you're traveling in a couple, there's a lot more time for introspection, because you're not worried as much about dealing with all these responsibilities of day-to-day life.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think that one final point to make would be that habits and routines play such a gigantic role in who we are as people. And of the ways to really break your habits, simply changing your location, going on a trip, especially a long trip, going somewhere where they speak a different language, that's a very accessible, very affordable way to break down and change negative habits into more positive habits. And so we're going to move a bit further down the article to another point and another excerpt from the section Around and Round and Round Trip Ticket.
And so it goes like this. Travel is often framed as an exercise in courage and the endeavor of the perennially curious. And yet it can also be an excuse for the exact opposite. Needing the structure of a trip to find excitement and adventure shows a lack of imagination rather than an abundance of it. And in cases where travel is used to flee the mess, disappointments, and deficiencies of one's normal life rather than facing them head on, nothing is more cowardly and counterfeit. Travel offers the same feeling of being on the threshold of something strange and wonderful, of existing in an in-between liminal state that Tolkien was so fond of seeking, but its effect is more temporary and fails to point beyond itself to something greater. The traveler who embarks without a pre-existing structure of self-knowledge and character, intending instead to find it along the way, is set up like a sieve. When the longings produced by his journey arise, they pass right through him. During the trip itself, he feels invigorated, purposeful, full of momentum, and on the path to bigger and better things. But he has merely mistaken movement for progress. Once he arrives back home, these feelings dry up and can only be reinvigorated by undertaking another excursion and getting another hit of the travel rush. The threshold experience, rather than being a doorway to greater things, merely turns into a cycle of its own duplication, an empty series of passport stamps.
So this is a really strong point, and I want to focus in on one sentence from the first paragraph. And in cases where travel is used to flee the mess, disappointments, and deficiencies of one's normal life rather than facing them head on, nothing is more cowardly and counterfeit. So what do you think about that point, that using travel as a way to get away from your problems is cowardly and counterfeit?
I think that it's a really interesting thing to put into. It's a very bold thing to write. So I commend the authors for putting that in there, first of all.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because they make like a few points like that where they're like, oh, these are really strong points. And then they kind of back away from it in their conclusion.
But so my opinion on it is that, I mean, it kind of goes back to our escapism episode where we talk about people are like consistently escaping. So what are you comparing it to? So say somebody goes through a really, really bad breakup or a divorce or something that's just like heartbreaking for them. They're going to process it in some way. So is it their whole like Elizabeth Gilbert, eat, pray, love, I'm going to go to Italy and travel the world and find myself? Or is it, I'm going to stay at home and do the single girl party thing or the single dude party thing, and I'm going to get like completely blackout drunk to the point where I forget who I am and forget what I'm feeling? Or is it, I'm going to go shopping and make myself feel better by dropping $1,000 at Marc Jacobs? Or is it, I'm going to make myself feel better through food or coffee or sex? Or, how is it that you're coping? Because if it's any of those things, then I think that's just as cowardly because you're still not facing it head on.
Yeah. So we've really hit on this in our travel and escapism episode where you kind of talk about what you're talking about. There's like some nuance there between, it's not that physically leaving isn't necessarily escapism and physically staying isn't necessarily confronting your problems, because if you look at people if you took a group of people who are traveling and you took a group of people who are just staying at home, going about their routines, the people who are traveling on average would be much more introspective and much more able to dig into those big issues. Because when you're at home and you go to work and you think about work and then you come home and turn on the TV and crack a beer, you're not exactly facing your problems head on. A lot of the times you're running away from them. And I feel like we've kind of touched on this right before, but this discounts really the value of getting space and perspective on issues. and the value of habits. Like when you can get away from your problems, get away from those people that are kind of triggering you to feel certain things, and step back and have some time where you can journal and read and then think about it from a distance, like an actual physical distance, you can get a lot better perspective on it. That's what we found. That's what so many people we've talked to on this show have found, that physical space has given them the courage to go back and deal with their problems head on. And it's courage that they wouldn't have had if they just hung around at home and ignored them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, an argument can be made for what the authors are saying. Like if you go through something that's really traumatic or really big in your life and you're at home and maybe you take a leave from work and you see a psychologist and you're dedicated to like a journaling meditation practice where you're really healing, then like, sure, you can deal with that at home. But is it any better to be at home and just use coping mechanisms than to go out and maybe have the space to actually process what's going on? And I'll fully acknowledge that it could go the other way, where somebody could be like, fuck this, I'm going to just go on a yacht sailing trip around Croatia and like have sex with a bunch of randoms and get really drunk every night. And I do know that there's people who do things like that, and that's probably not super valuable for a healing process or for dealing with your problems either.
But that's not really like the travel they're talking about, or that's the cult of travel idea isn't about like going on a yacht week for 2 weeks and partying your face off. It's more about like actually taking a long trip and kind of putting travel in as a life stage. It's not about like going on a vacation for a couple weeks. Totally.
And I acknowledge that. I just wanted to acknowledge the other side of it, because I think that a lot of people, when they're like, oh, you're just running away from your problems, it's like, well, I'm not really running away from my problems. I'm actually dealing with my problems better than you are, because I'm actually taking the time to process them instead of just burying them deep beneath layers of coffee and work drama and television and
yeah, but that's the point, that it is possible to use travel as a mental escape, but there are other mental escapes that are much more common at home that people use a lot more often than the mental escape while traveling. And that if you spend time traveling, you find that you kind of come to an end of mental escape fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think that with traveling, you have a lot more, we've said it a million times, but you've got a lot more space. And the thing that space gives is it kind of forces you to kind of deal with the things that are coming up in your mind. Or at least I know for me, it's like you get to a point where you've been on a bus for like 12 hours and you can't hide out from your thoughts anymore. There's no work. There's no after work drinks. There's no anything to hide from. You're kind of just like sitting with you and yourself, and you're forced to sort of deal with those things at that point.
Yeah. And so continuing on in that excerpt, there's a line about the travel who embarks without a pre-existing structure of self-knowledge and character, intending instead to find it along the way, is set up like a sieve. When the longings produced by his journey arise, they pass right through him. During the trip itself, he feels invigorated, purposeful, full of momentum, and on the path to bigger and better things. But he is merely mistaken movement for progress. Once he arrives back home, these feelings dry up and can only be reinvigorated by undertaking another excursion and getting another hit of the travel rush. The threshold experience, rather than being a doorway to greater things, merely turns into a cycle of its own duplication, an empty series of passport stamps.
I think that this is another really interesting and bold thing that the authors have done here. I think that there's like, I can relate to this in a little bit. Coming home from our first backpacking trip, I feel like it was the first time in my life where I felt like there was something other than the typical like life formula that I could do. There was something more to just like getting a job and working it forever or until retirement, and getting married and having babies and buying a house. But coming back and kind of entering the same social circle in the same city that we'd been in, I sort of felt like it was like lost. Like I had a hard time like holding on to those feelings, those memories, those changes I wanted to make. And I think for me, the thing in my mind that made sense is I was like, I need to go again. I need to go again. And after going again and digging a little bit deeper with that, I think I realized that the reason I felt that way is because I wasn't fulfilled in my job. I wasn't fulfilled in what I was doing day to day, and that there are ways to feel fulfilled day to day anywhere in the world. You have to find those. And I think that it took traveling for me to get there.
Yeah. And I think the major thing this is hinting at is kind of this question of travel as a means to something or travel as an end to itself. And so from our personal experience, we went and really can relate to this point of coming home, feeling invigorated, purposeful, full of momentum, excited to be alive, and coming home and hopping right back into kind of a life that was much more conventional, and seeing all that slip away, and then having this desire to go traveling again. And then the second time we went traveling, realizing that, okay, this fleeting feeling of being alive because we're traveling and we don't have responsibilities, we're in new places, exploring new things. Like, there are ways to make this into a part of our day-to-day lives outside of taking this travel experience, because I think we'd both firmly agree that travel isn't something that is going to be satisfying to you if you just perpetually do it. It's not like the end goal. But if you use it as a means to personal development, a means to introspection, thinking more about what you want of your life, and just reinvigorating yourself, it can really contribute in a lot of ways to your life.
Yeah. I think that you put that really eloquently. I don't think I could have said it even as good as you said it, but it's exactly that. It's sort of this idea that you change your life a little bit, and then you come home and you feel dissatisfied, and the only thing that you know is that travel made you feel better. So it's like, I need to go again. So it does kind of have this almost like hit like a drug thing, and it's like, I need more. I need a harder place. I need somewhere where they really don't speak English. I need something that's really going to challenge me. And it seems like it's always like more. But I think I think that there's some truth behind that, where it can be like that, but it's like travel isn't the thing that you're really seeking. It's the feeling of being alive that you feel while you're traveling. And if you can connect to that, then it's all of a sudden like, okay, it's this feeling. How do I get that feeling no matter where I am? And it's, it can take a while. It can take like a while to figure that out. But once you've got that, it's like, okay, how do I get that feeling whether or not I'm in Paris or if I'm in like, I don't know, Huntsville, Alabama? Like, it shouldn't matter where you are in the world. It should be about having this happiness come from within, because you know what really makes you tick in the world.
Yeah. And then I'd also say that it's not like about traveling like 2 times and then never doing it again. I think that it really is something to the fact that when people spend time traveling, they want to keep going back and back and back to it. And it's not like something like a heroin addict where you see them go back and back and back and then they get destroyed. Like, people who consistently and regularly travel seem to be some of the most fulfilled, alive people that we run into.
Because that's a good point. Like, I definitely agreed with sort of like the drug thing, but I think that you make a good point. It's like, yes, in terms of the way that a drug is, you might need more and more and more, but it's like more and more and more isn't towards like a really bad ending. It's towards like a better ending. Yeah.
And as human beings, we get into these kind of routines and rhythms, and things that once were exciting become kind of dull and boring, and we kind of lose presence with our day-to-day life unless we're really focused on it. And there's things you can do at home, meditating, going for like weekend trips, spending time with friends, things you can do to snap out of that, reading books, going on adventures in your mind. But travel is still a really good way to snap yourself out of those routines, to kind of regain presence and to add a lot of value to your life. And we'll just jump into one final excerpt that's kind of a concluding point. In the same way, travel should be seen not as a magic pill, a cure-all, something necessary to your personal development, but an optional enrichment for those already living purposeful, fulfilled lives. An engaging pastime, a hobby like any other, enjoyed by some and not by all. Travel should never be an escape from life, only an enhancement of it.
Yeah, I think that is a really good conclusion to this article. And I think it it's a much more softer sort of than some of the other bolder statements that have been made in a couple of the past paragraphs.
Yeah, that's what I kind of hinted at when I thought they kind of backed away from some of those bolder claims they made. But this is something that I think we both completely agree on. Travel isn't going to solve all your problems. It's not a magic pill, and it's not something necessary to living a happy life. We wouldn't make any of those claims. And I don't know about if the kind of popular travel zeitgeist would make those claims. I think that what we would both agree on is that it's an environment that's very conducive to personal development. It's very conducive to enriching your life, to finding more fulfillment, to finding more purpose, probably in a way that's more so than an engaging pastime or a hobby.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, my favorite pastime or hobby is yoga, which is a mindful exercise, an exercise in mindfulness. It's probably could be argued one of the best ways to sort of reconnect with yourself and sort of to figure out what's going on in your mind. I know for me, it's like almost every time I practice yoga, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what's up. It's like these moments of like, okay, I'm feeling that. And yet I think that travel can help you, or has helped me on like a much bigger scale to sort of figure out the things that I'm feeling, the things that are going on in my life, processing things from my past, thinking about my future, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so I guess like they made points earlier in this article about how it's kind of cowardice to run away from your problems and go on a big trip, or to feel dissatisfied with life and think, I'm going to go traveling. And then they kind of make this point here that travel should be used as an enrichment of your life. And so I guess I would really say that those points in time where you are really struggling with something at home, maybe you don't know what you want to do after college, or you feel lost in your career, those are the times when you need an enrichment of your life. And travel is one of the best ways to get enrichment of your life. And so maybe you don't see travel as a magic pill that, oh, I'm going to go find out my purpose in life because I'm going to South America for 6 months. But I don't think that many people actually look at it like that. I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm going on this trip. While I'm there, I'm going to learn a language. While I'm there, I'm going to read a lot. While I'm there, I'm going to journal a lot, and just kind of get an experience that enriches my life.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people too don't go into travel with like any intention other than like having a really cool, fun experience. I know that was us the first time we traveled. I don't think there was any intentionality behind how we expected to come home in 6 months. I know for me, I was like, I just want to get away. I want to break from school. I want to break from work. I just want to break from everything. I want to just explore the world and have fun. And all these things happened that enriched my life that I didn't really plan for or expect, or I didn't seek out.
Yeah. And I think that this Against the Cult of Travel article is kind of arguing against a caricature of a traveler that doesn't really live up to reality. So this is the person who says things like, oh my God, like you haven't been to Madagascar, like you don't even know what a mango's like. Or people who act like they're more virtuous because they've gone to 25 countries than one country. Things like that, which I don't think you really find all too often with people who go traveling.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely encountered people who are a little bit like that, but it's been pretty rare. When I think of all the people that I've met traveling, those people don't stand out in my mind. It's the people who I'm like, wow, you're doing this with your life? Like, that's really badass. Like, I kind of want to be that cool. It's like more the people who have encouraged me or inspired me or showed me something different that can be life.
Yeah. And so I think that it's natural for a lot of people to kind of pull back against anything that's popular. And travel has become one of those things where if you were someone who's not traveling very often and you see all these memes about people going places, like, oh, like you see your friend in Thailand, they're posting some douchey quote about travel. I feel like it's natural to feel like you want to point out that, hey, just because you've physically taken a plane to a different country, that's not exactly an obstacle or a barrier that's really hard to overcome. It's not anything too virtuous. But travel being popular, I feel like, is a very good thing. People getting out, meeting people from different cultures, developing a more solid reality-based worldview because they can see what it's like to actually be in a different country. It's not something that's scary. It's not something that's to be feared, and that they learn all these lessons about how people all over the world are just people. They learn lessons about how they can really be reliant on themselves to solve issues when they are in a country with a different language. They can learn to trust people. All these things are very beneficial, and it's a very beneficial thing to become more popular. Like, if people stop being so interested in watching days full of football games every Sunday and instead spending time going on adventures, or people stop spending so much money on like really expensive vehicles and instead invest that money in taking career breaks to go on trips, I think that the world becomes a better place. And it's not necessarily such a bad thing that it's become popular to say that travel is a good thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think that you touched on something really good there that I want to expand on. It's like when you can understand the world for yourself instead of just what you get through like popular culture or the news or like mainstream media, you can actually understand what a country is really like or a group of people are really like. And I think that you said it perfectly. Like, we realize that we're all just people. We're all just humans. We're just, maybe we have a different skin color, or maybe we believe in something slightly different, but it's like, we're all just people. And I think that when you can understand that somebody across the world who thinks a little bit different from you is just a person, you have more capacity for like love and happiness as opposed to like hate and resentment towards that person. And I think that when people understand that more, the world is a more peaceful place. Yeah.
And I do think at the end of the day, we agree with a lot of stuff in this article. It's just maybe put out in a ways that with a bit more nuance, we could definitely agree on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a really well-written article. I think it's a really bold article in a lot of ways. I think that it's always really great when somebody comes and counters something that's really popular, because I think that when something becomes really popular, especially with social media, people kind of just latch onto it and then they kind of believe the same things as other people. And I think that it's always good to find your own opinions on it. And so I respect the authors of this article and I respect their opinions. And I think that we're probably both really curious about what listeners out there think. So we'll put a link for the article in the show notes. Definitely have a read. If you have any opinions that are similar or different to ours or the authors, definitely let us know. You can send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. We would love to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, so definitely check out the link in the show notes. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
As always, thanks for listening.
Till next time. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanders.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanders or on Twitter at WorldWanders1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye. We really hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. And if you like the podcast and you want to support us in creating more high quality episodes, you can visit www.patreon.com/theworldwanders. A little goes a long way. And thanks in advance for your support.